The convicted criminal Steve Bannon thought he was finally going to get his criminal history wiped. Remember the 2 counts that he was convicted of by a jury for failure to appear in front of Congress for the January 6 hearings? He was issued a subpoena and defied them, saying that claiming executive privilege despite the fact that he was a private citizen at the time. Well, the jury saw through him, and Steve Bannon, in fact, served 4 months as a result of that sentence. Well, he's still a convicted criminal, and he wanted that wiped clean. And Todd Blanche, doing Trump's bidding, asked a court to dismiss it with prejudice. But that judge, that federal judge, just denied that motion to dismiss. And this was not some sort of liberal judge. This was a judge appointed by Trump himself just in 2019. My name is Dina Doll, and this is the MeidasTouch Network. Let's get into this. I mean, the justice system and federal judges in particular are the firewall, and it is a little bit of a hit and miss. But even Trump-appointed judges, time and time again, have found that Trump is going a step too far with his lawlessness. And here's the situation, because even the Supreme Court was willing to help out Steve Bannon, which is, of course, not surprising considering there's a MAGA majority on the court. Well, what happened was Todd Blanche said that they were going to right the wrongs of the Department of Justice. This is back in January, had announced that they were going to undo political persecutions. Now, this was, of course, not a political persecution. Congress is trying to find out what happened to the insurrection on January 6th and asked for Steve Bannon to provide documents, testimony to help them figure out what happened. And of course, he denied doing so. And so jury of his peers convicted him. Todd Blanche said that he needed to right that wrong. And so he filed a motion to dismiss. Steve Bannon, in the meantime, then also appealed his conviction. The Court of Appeals upheld his conviction. The Supreme Court at the time was considering whether or not to take his case. And when they saw that Todd Blanche, the Department of Justice, filed a motion to dismiss, they in fact vacated the judgment and asked the lower court to proceed accordingly. That was then sent back to the lower court, the district court level, not even the appellate court, the district court level. Well, Judge Nichols, who was appointed by Trump in 2019, found that even Trump's own DOJ could come up with not even a good reason, but no reason at all for why this should be dismissed. In fact, Todd Blanche's DOJ says, quote, "The government has determined in its prosecutorial discretion that dismissal of the criminal case is in the interest of justice." That's literally all they say. No reason at all given why all the time, energy, and resources, years to that date, literally convening a jury trial, why all of a sudden, that's not in the public interest. I mean, it is a farce. They can't give a reason because there is no reason. Well, this judge, this Trump-appointed judge, who was not appointed all that long ago, sure, he has many extremist views. Even that is a step too far for him. He says the government's motion does not explain its motivation for seeking dismissal of the indictment and thus fails to meet the rule. The sole explanatory statement in the motion reads, and then he quotes that. Basically, even this Trump judge says, if you don't have even any reason, I cannot grant this motion. And so this is where we are, folks. We're in a state where the Department of Justice thinks they are above the law. The people in charge of our law think they don't have to comply with the law, are willing to indict Comey for taking a photo of seashells, for dismissing a jury conviction for Steve Bannon because Steve Bannon is Trump's friend. They think they can pick and choose. But the fact of the matter is there is laws, procedures, rules that they even have to follow. And really, if they were being honest, they would say, we want to dismiss Steve Bannon because Steve Bannon said that Trump could have a third term. But even they apparently think that's a little bit too far to put in this motion. So they gave no reason at all. So despite the fact that even the Supreme Court was willing to give some sort of good faith, pass to the Department of Justice motion to dismiss. This Trump judge said not so fast. And lest we forget why Todd Blanche is willing to jump through all these hoops for Steve Bannon. In 2026, this is what Steve Bannon had to say about Trump doing a third term at the end of 2025. Take a listen.
He's going to get a third term. So Trump 28, Trump is going to be president in 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is, but there's a plan. We had longer odds in 16 and longer odds in 24 than we got in 28. And President Trump will be the president of the United States, and the country needs him to be president of the United States. We have to finish what we started. Trump is a vehicle. I know this will drive you guys crazy, but he's a vehicle of divine providence. He's an instrument. He's very imperfect. He's not churchy, not particularly religious, but he's an instrument of divine will. And you can tell this of how he's pulled this off. We need him for at least one more term, right? And he'll get that in 28.
Before we get back to it, a word from someone who spent her career reading contracts. The fine print always matters, and nowhere is that more true than Medicare. Every plan is essentially a contract, and the differences hide in the details. Which doctors, which prescriptions, what you actually pay when something goes wrong. Most people never get a fair walkthrough of those terms because many agents are paid more to place you in certain plans. That's a conflict of interest, and you deserve better than a conflicted advisor. That's why I like Chapter. They're the only Medicare advisor that compares every plan nationwide, and they're honest, not paid to steer you toward any particular one. They'll translate the fine print into plain English, and if your current plan is the right fit, they'll tell you so. It's free, it takes under 20 minutes, and they've saved people an average of $1,100 a year. If you're on Medicare or turning 65 soon, get a real second opinion. Call Chapter at 928-683-7766. That's 928-683-7766. Now, Steve Bannon in that speech was doing a few things. One, he was speaking to Trump because he knows the best way to try to get his criminal history cleaned is to just flatter Trump's ego. And the idea that he could even physically or mentally fulfill a third term is definitely flattering. The fact of the matter is Americans, about only 33% even approve of him. And we are seeing day after day, Trump really cognitively and physically decline in front of us. The idea that he could fulfill a third term, never mind even have any real group of Americans want him to fulfill a third term is nonsense. But he also talks about the fact that he's a vehicle and that they're not finished yet. And that probably is very true. And so you do wonder, what do the Project 2025 folks, the Steve Bannon folks, actually have planned for us in 2028? They know that Trump is going to be a lame duck president starting 2026. They know he won't be popular enough to win in 2028. Is he going to be asked to step aside because he's too sick and Vance takes the throne and takes over and becomes this hero? Do they let one of the assassination attempts go through? Perhaps Democrats should actually be calling for more security because otherwise they'll just be blamed for it. There's some scary stuff in that statement by Steve Bannon. It is true. Project 2025 has lots of plans for women, for minorities. It's really scary stuff. And Trump is a vehicle. As bad as he is personally, he's also just a puppet. So for now, this Trump judge standing up for the rule of law, all of us have to really pay attention to what all these folks are doing. But in the day and age where we see Trump and MAGA and Project 2025 think that they're above the law, it's really heartening to see some judges still care about the rule of law and stand up for the rule of law. And perhaps it's the best argument for why we should have lifetime appointees, because I don't think a judge would be willing to do that if they thought they were going to have to go work for a lobbyist afterwards. If you haven't subscribed to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel, be sure to do though. Find the Mistrial Audio Podcast wherever you listen to audio podcasts. Like, subscribe, comment. It really helps support my show. And please check out the Mistrial sponsors in the description below. So grateful for my sponsors because they do not censor what I have to say, which is so brave in this moment.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.